Namaste to all the students from across India who are participating in this year's Vidyarthi Vigyan Manthan. I wish you all the very best in the forthcoming examination and may you all shine bright with laurels. I am thankful to the academic committee of Vidyarthi Vigyan Manthan for selecting and highlighting the work of an Indian scientist who introduced the Indian science to the world. As part of study material of VVM, you have been provided with a book, the legendary Prafulla Chandra, and also the prominent science magazine Science India. The Science India magazine also contains an article on Prafulla Chandra, revolutionary in the garb of a scientist. I am Professor Rajeev Singh from University of Delhi, and having written both the documents, I am here to discuss with you students the greatness of Prafulla Chandra. To help you understand the greatness of Ray, I'll quote the reporting by the correspondent of British newspaper Manchester Guardian. It says, "He is also a real organizer and a real teacher. I heard a European saying, if Mr. Gandhi had only been able to create 2 more Sir P.C. Rays, he would have succeeded in getting Swaraj within this year." And gradually, when I go ahead in my talk, you will get to know many instances of why this was said. The book has been divided into 12 chapters to showcase the various roles of Prafulla Chandra. Acharya Prafulla Chandra, also known as the master of nitrites, the father of chemistry in India, and his various roles as a professor, a teacher, a communicator, a startup industrialist, a philanthropist, a book writer, and numerous other roles that he has played. You will find at many places that I have mentioned verbatim from his autobiography. These anecdotes and information are very important as it helps us understand the India at that time and how it changed into present India. Prafulla Chandra, or his pet name was Fulu. He was born on August 2, 1861 in the village of Raruli Katipara, Jessore. Presently, this district is in Bangladesh. His parents, Harish Chandra Ray, and his mother, Bhuvan Mohini Devi, appreciated higher education and had an extensive library at home. His home had a big library with prominent books, magazines of that time. There were books in many international and local languages consisting of literature and history. And this academic atmosphere at his home laid the foundation for him to be captivated towards research and his contribution to the society. His education started at the school founded by his father and was later completed in Calcutta. He took admission in Vidyasagar College, but his science classes were held at Hindu College. Presently, this Hindu College has been renamed as Presidency College, Kolkata by the British. Halfway through his BA studies, he won the Gilchrist Scholarship in 1882, and at the age of 26, he was awarded a DSc, or a Doctor of Science degree in Inorganic Chemistry from the Edinburgh University in 1887. His thesis was titled Conjugated Sulfates of Copper Magnesium Group, a study of isomorphous mixtures and molecular combination. His work was judged as the best and was awarded the Hope Prize. In fact, he was so much appreciated by his colleagues and his teachers that he was made the vice president of the Edinburgh University Chemical Society in 1887. The president being a professor from the university itself, and he being the vice president as a student. All his colleagues and his teachers appreciated him because of his disciplined life, work ethics, and simplicity. Now, let's go for the reason why we as Indians and why we as patriotic Indians should know about him. Let's begin with his student life itself. On page 15, you will find an incident of Edinburgh University when he was doing his PhD over there. In 1885, he took part in an essay competition announced by Sir Stafford Northcote, the Lord Rector of the University of the Edinburgh, on the subject India before and after the mutiny. He wrote a very vociferous essay, highly criticizing the work being done by the British government. Obviously, he didn't win the prize, but his essay was given the title of Proxime Assassinat, that is, the nearest approach to the best. In his essay, he describes with a lot of courage and conviction how the British were perpetuating colonial exploitation in India. They were neglecting the development and education. Ray was so brave that he distributed the copies of this essay in the city of Edinburgh to the general public. Although the point to be noted over here is he was in England, right under the nose of British, and despite being a student himself, he stood against the wrongs being done by British. In fact, one of the British parliamentarian, Sir John Bright, was very appreciative of Ray and recommended him highly. The Scottish newspaper of that time, the Scotsman, which is being published today also, it remarked that the essay contains information in reference to India which will not be found elsewhere and is deserving of the utmost notice. So this explains the inherited patriotism Prafulla Chandra Ray had. Now let's move ahead. After completing his education, he came back to Kolkata and he applied for the job of an assistant professor in India. At that time, there was a requirement of recommendation letters from eminent personalities to get a job, and he had recommendation letters from some of the great personalities of that time in the field of chemistry: Professor Cumb Brown, Sir William Muir, Professor C.H. Tawney, who was himself the principal of the Presidency College. They wrote impressive letters of introduction about him. So when he came over here to India in 1888, he applied for a job in the Indian Educational Services, that is the IES. The Indian Educational Services of the British was a highly racist, I would say, was a highly racist field. The job was divided into two classes, that is the imperial services and the provincial services. The imperial services was better, they had high pay, they had better privileges, and most of the time it was given only to the British officers or British citizens, and the provincial services was given only to Indians, and they were at much less or almost what you will call a third or a fourth size of the salary was given to the Indians. So, despite being a PhD from abroad, despite having highly recommended letters, he was still given a job of a temporary assistant professor in provincial services with a very low salary of 250 rupees per month. This was a direct insult to a person having such a high caliber. And obviously, Ray didn't like this. He approached the British officer, that is the Director of Public Instruction in Darjeeling at that time, Sir Alfred Croft. And he mentions about this in his autobiography that Croft almost got into temper and exclaimed, "There are other walks of life open to you. Nobody compels you to take this appointment." That is, Croft said that there is no need for you to come and join this job if you don't like being a temporary assistant professor. If you feel you are being insulted, leave this job. But Professor Ray, being a researcher and a teacher at heart, and with his will to contribute to the development of science for the nation, joined this job in July 1889. At the same time, Jagdish Chandra Bose was also part of this college at that time, and during the same time he was not accepting the salary against the same attitude given to Jagdish Chandra Bose. Let's come now to the contribution in the field of chemistry by Prafulla Chandra Ray. When he joined Presidency College or the Hindu College over here in Calcutta, he started his research in the field of detection of adulterated foods, edible fats and food items. He conducted chemical examination of adulterants present in market, available fats, oils and ghees, and published his findings in the Journal of Asiatic Society of Bengal in 1894. His main aim was to create standards for food items and put it in public domain. The identified adulterants being used in Bengal. Right now we have FSAAI in India, which is working in this, which have developed these standards, and see, almost like around 125 years back he was working on the same field. In 1894, Prafulla Chandra Ray began analysis of certain rare Indian minerals in his quest to discover some new elements to fill the gaps in Mendeleev's periodic table. He travelled far and wide all through India, collecting samples of various types of mineral ores and compounds, and by 1894 he had built up an extensive library of samples. Although he was not able to discover any new element, but he had a huge library of identified minerals and ores present in the whole nation of India. The discovery of Mercurys nitrite. He reported the first ever synthesis of the previously unknown compound of Mercurys nitrite, Hg2NO2 whole twice, which he narrates in his autobiography as the discovery of Mercurys nitrite opened a new chapter in my life. This compound of mercury was a fascinating example of two relatively unstable ions combining to form a stable substance. So this discovery of Mercurys nitrite was reported worldwide, and eminent scientists like Victor Meyer, Vollard, Berthollet and his various teachers sent him congratulatory messages. In fact, the famous magazine Nature also reported about his discovery. On his discovery, Alexander Pedler, his former teacher said, Dr. P.C. Ray, by his discovery of the method of preparation of this compound, has filled up a blank in our knowledge of the Mercury series. The famous British chemist Henry H. Armstrong stated, the way in which you have gradually made yourself master of nitrites is very interesting, and the fact that you have established that as a class they are far from being the unstable bodies chemists had supposed is an important addition to our knowledge, and that is why he was given the title of Master of Nitrites. Being a teacher, let's come now to his role as a passionate and an innovative teacher. As a teacher, Acharya Ray was an ideal person who was loved by his students. He believed in the philosophy of Sanskrit shlok, which he usually used to quote, wish for victory everywhere except from your son and from your disciple. Throughout his 27 years at Presidency College, he always preferred taking the classes of the first year students. A very interesting example that you will find in the book, and which he mentions in his autobiography also, the way he taught the subject of chemistry to his students. He would bring pieces of bones to the class, heat them over there live in front of everyone, burn them on a burner, then put the burnt bone in his mouth, chew it and swallow it. The aim was to show that the bone was almost a pure chemical compound, free from organic impurities, and for a chemist, it was phosphate of calcium, which was also prescribed in powdered form as a nerve tonic at that time. So this was the type of example teaching that he used to teach in his classes. In 1916, he joined the University College of Sciences, Kolkata, at Raja Bazar. We know it today as the Raja Bazar College of Sciences, still working, on the request of another great Indian doctor, Acharya Ashutosh Mukherjee, who was also the Vice Chancellor of Calcutta University at that time. At this college, he was able to carry out his research work along with his students in a much better manner, and he is credited for shaping the science college into the center of excellence. And it was during this time that his students started calling him by the title of Acharya. Now I'll mention another incident which I have mentioned in our book also. On page 11, the great astrophysicist Meghnad Saha, who happened to be the extended student of Sir Prafulla Chandra Ray, Meghnad Saha in his autobiography narrated an incident about him, that once Sir P.C. Ray was invited for a lecture at a Lahore University, and since his famous book, The History of Hindu Chemistry, had been published, he was called almost everywhere to deliver a talk about his book. So when he was giving his address at the Lahore University, among his audience there was a young Englishman, a professor at one of the local colleges over there, who was not at all impressed by what Sir Ray was speaking. And while he was delivering his talk, he was making faces and laughing and sneering. Professor Ray noticed it, was apparently annoyed. After completing his lecture and describing all the apparatus that he was displaying that was being used by the Indians, he took in his hand a lump of Makar Dhwaja, which we today call as resublimed mercuric sulfide, which is still used as a medicine, and previously in ancient times it was also used as a medicine. Sir P.C. Ray took the lump in his hand and said, "Look here, my friends, with such crude apparatus, the Indians 2000 years ago used to prepare such a fine chemical and used it to alleviate human sufferings, and this at a time when the ancestor of our friend over there were eating raw berries and wearing raw hides." The Englishman was left red-faced and he rushed out of the hall. Later on, the Englishman became a great follower of Prafulla Chandra Ray. So this was his greatness that he had established about himself. His work, he was so confident about his work, he was so confident about his discoveries that he had mentioned, if you read his autobiography, you will find, the young students will find that there are many instances which are relevant today also. So another important foundation that he laid at that time was the establishment of the Indian Chemical Society. Everybody knows the name of the Royal Society of Chemistry, which is in London, and it was the one which was working all over the world. But Indians didn't have a chemical society at that time in the modern terms. So Sir Prafulla Chandra Ray established the Indian Chemical Society in 1924 along with his some great students and colleagues like Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar, J.N. Mukherjee, J.C. Ghosh. They started this and registered this Indian Chemical Society, still working. This society is still working, and registered it on 9th May 1924. P.C. Ray being the founder president of this society for the first 2 terms. The establishment of the new chemical society and its journal was well received in academic circles in India and all over the world. The London Chemical Society sent this message: hearty congratulations and warm wishes to the newly formed Indian Chemical Society. So this was his commitment as a communicator. Also, he found that a huge work is being done by various Indian scientists and students, but that work is not being sent to the common man. So, along with his student Meghnad Saha, he established the Indian Science News Association and started this journal Science and Culture in 1935. The aim was to spread the information about the research and the work being done by Indian scientists and students. Now let's come to his role in the freedom movement, or why he is called as a revolutionary. Although despite being a scientist, generally scientists are expected to work in their labs, but if the nation is in trouble and if the freedom of the general public is in trouble, the scientist should rise. Similarly, Sir P.C. Ray is also known as a revolutionary scientist of independence movement. In 1924, during the peak of non-cooperation movement, he delivered his famous inspiring quote: "Science can afford to wait, but Swaraj cannot." Before we move further, I'll give you an example. I have quoted this on the page 17 of the book, And this paragraph has been quoted verbatim as it is from what he mentions in his autobiography, Life and Experiences of a Bengali Chemist. This reporting was done in the newspaper Amrit Bazar Patrika in February 1919. And this will help you to understand the greatness of Sir Prafulla Chandra Ray. And I would say the greatness of the public, the Indian public at that time. Sir P.C. Ray used to go for his evening walk at the Kolkata Maidan. Every day he used to go over there for his evening walks along with his students, discussing all research and what was happening and how to start new things. So on one day, he received a message from one of his friends that a meeting is being organized in the town hall at Calcutta, in Kolkata, as part of the freedom movement. So this was against the Rowlatt Act. The Rowlatt Act, our young friends will get to know in history what was Rowlatt Act, that all your all your rights were snatched and they were directly under the control of the British government. So there was a meeting that was organized against the Rowlatt Act at the town hall of Kolkata. So the newspaper says, Mr. C.R. Das then asked Dr. Sir P.C. Ray to speak on the resolution. Although, you see, P.C. Ray was standing behind in the crowd, but C.R. Das identified amongst the crowd that there was Dr. P.C. Ray among the crowd. So he called him up at the stage to speak. And Dr. Ray mentions in his autobiography that as I rose to speak, I witnessed a scene that I shall never forget. As C.R. Das asked Dr. P.C. Ray to speak, for a few minutes, Dr. P.C. Ray could not utter a single syllable as ovation after ovation, cheers after cheers, shouts of Vande Mataram greeted the doctor. The crowd was so inspired by finding that the great Sir Prafulla Chandra Ray is among the masses, is among the freedom fighters. They respected Dr. Prafulla Ray so much that finding a great scientist fighting for the freedom movement, they were so happy to find him over there. Dr. Ray began by saying that he had not the remotest idea that he would have to address the meeting even for a single moment. I came as a mere spectator. I am a man of the laboratory, but I feel there are occasions, and the newspaper says that the rest of the sentence was drowned in deafening cheers. That means they were so impressed. Dr. Ray repeated that he felt that there are occasions which demanded that he should leave his test tube to attend to the call of the country. So grave was the danger to our national life that even Dr. P.C. Ray left his work in the laboratory and joined the meeting to raise his voice of protest against the obnoxious bill. So this newspaper reporting by Amrit Bazar Patrika is a very eye-opener that at what high esteem the journal public of Kolkata regarded Professor Prafulla Chandra Ray, that when he came to speak, they were so inspired. Another anecdote which I'll mention over here is, like, he was a practicing Gandhian and he believed in the ways and principles of Gandhi. But it was not that he never criticized Gandhi. He was not always accepting what he was saying. So when Mahatma Gandhi visited Kolkata in 1901 on the invitation of Gopal Krishna Gokhale, Gandhiji, in his book, My Experiments with Truth, on part 3 and chapter 17, he writes about Prafulla Chandra. Gandhiji writes about Prafulla Chandra. Of these, the one who stands foremost in my memory is Dr. P.C. Ray. He lived practically next door and was a very frequent visitor. And Gopal Krishna Gokhale used to introduce Dr. Ray to me. This is Professor Ray, who is having a monthly salary of rupees 800, keeps just rupees 40 for himself and devotes the balance to public purpose. He is not and does not want to get married. So if you see that out of his salary of rupees 800, he was only keeping rupees 40 and rupees 760 he was contributing to the society, to all his students, to all his research lab. It's a great act. And there are many other incidents that he mentions, and you will find it in our book also, about his criticism of the things going on in India at that time. There were many instances when he criticized Gandhiji also, like during the Montemurlo reforms of separate elections for Hindus and Muslims, and his criticism for the Khilafat movement, and his support for Subhash Chandra Bose as a Congress president. So he was very vocal at many points. Despite being a scientist, he was aware of what was going on around. And when he died, many of his colleagues, many of what you call unknown people came out in open and mentioned his another contribution to the freedom movement, that he was the one who was supporting the revolutionaries. That is, he was helping them out in carrying out the freedom fights. That is, helping them to develop the bombs, helping them to develop the ammunitions. And that is why the Bengal government, later on it was found that the Bengal police records mention about him as a revolutionary in the garb of a scientist. The police always had a doubt about him that he was helping them, but they were not able to gather proofs about him. But in the records, you will still find the notings. So, he had a great role as a revolutionary scientist. So, this was his another role. Now, let's come to his another major role, which I think is required by the present day teachers, professors and our students. Our Prime Minister has also announced a term, that is the startup. So think about it, like almost 125 years back, he was a startup industrialist. Since childhood, Prafulla Ray had observed the frequent famines and poverty in the country. Due to his childhood knowledge of ancient Indian history, he was aware about the highly developed Indian industries existing before the arrival of British, who had deliberately destroyed and crushed the native manufacturers to promote the British interest. And gradually, Indians had lost the inspiration and hope because they were not being allowed. For almost like 100 years previous to this, they were not being allowed to start anything new. Whenever they used to start any new venture, it was crushed. So gradually, with the generations, people stopped starting anything new and started depending upon the British. And this was not at all liked by a highly educated and inspired Prafulla Chandra. And he found that there was huge unemployment because of this. There were some few only British industries. The locals were not allowed to start industries, and because of this there was huge unemployment. So since he being a scientist, he being highly educated, he took this fight and established in 1893 India's first pharmaceutical company, the Bengal Chemicals. Right now, till day today, this Bengal Chemicals is working in Kolkata and is known as the Bengal Chemicals and Pharmaceutical Works Limited. It's a huge industry. If you go to Kolkata, you should visit it. And he started this industry with a mere investment of only rupees 700. So, out of his salary, he was contributing such a huge amount. Okay. And since he was a chemistry student himself, he set up an in-house research facility to design and develop all those solvents, chemicals and reagents which were of utmost necessity for industries in Kolkata. Each of these chemicals previously were being imported at very high cost from England. So the basic necessary reagents like sulfuric acid, which is a very necessary part of chemical processing industry, he started making it. The spirit of nitric ether, syrup ferriiodide, so the tincture of nux vomica. He started manufacturing these basic reagents which was required for every industry in his small industry. And being from an inorganic and analytical background, Ray used to give training himself to his workers and staff. He was highly excited and dedicated towards his work. And you can gauge the excitement from the fact that after his academic work, he used to work in the Bengal chemical factory daily himself along with his workers from 7 to 8 p.m. In his autobiography, Ray pens this excitement as the very idea of locally manufacturing pharmaceutical preparations, which hitherto had to be imported, acted like a tonic. So, जब हमारे पास कोई सपना होता है और हमारे पास एक एम होता है, हमें नींद नहीं आती है. And that is what Ray was going through. He was so excited that he himself used to work in the industry. And this excitement, along with his students, he was able to establish so many industries like the Acharya Prafulla Chandra Ray cotton mills, Bengal salt manufacturing company, Bengal potteries, Bengal enamel works, Bengal steam navigation, Bengal paper, canning and condiments, tanneries, publishing houses, Bharati scales and engineering. And even today you will find many of these industries still working, and many of the products that these industries started for the very first time in India, you are still using those over here in our homes, like naphthalene and phenyl bottles. These were all started by Prafulla Chandra Ray, the Bengal Chemicals, and we are still using them. Now let's come to his role as a philanthropist and as a contributor to the society. Being from a humble background, Ray had always seen the poverty among the masses of Bengal, and he always had that spirit to contribute to the society. He never missed an opportunity where he was able to give his contribution to the welfare of the citizens. Even as the owner of various industries, he never took any salary and distributed all his part among the workers. In 1921, during the famine of Khulna, in 1922, the flood affected North Bengal. In 1923, the Bengal Relief Committee for Floods In 1931, the floods in North Bengal, and at various occasions, he contributed by collecting huge amounts of funds running into lakhs, which nowadays you can say into crores of rupees, for the welfare of the people affected by the floods and famine. His main contributors and supporters were his students and great people like Subhash Chandra Bose, who used to help him in his endeavors. The book also mentions a reporting by the special correspondent of the Manchester Guardian, who appreciates the work of Prafulla Chandra and heavily criticizes the British engineers and their faulty designs, who built a railway line and blocked the flow of water, which caused heavy floods in Bengal. So, as a philanthropist, he contributed immensely by collecting funds and by playing a major role. The next and the last chapter of our book, his role as a writer, his role as a researcher in ancient Indian sciences. His book that taught the ancient Indian chemistry to the whole world. His famous book, The History of Hindu Chemistry. As a student at the University of Edinburgh, Ray was impressed by the scientific knowledge of ancient in the Western world, and this generated immense curiosity in him to explore the extensive contribution of ancient India in the field of science and technology. He mentions and he found out that India's Hindu traditional sciences was a knowledge bank which we were utilizing in our daily life, but were taking all these things for granted as it was our way of life. The importance of maintaining and nurturing this tradition and past knowledge was important for success of India. Ray says in his autobiography, the Hindu nation, with its glorious past and vast latent potentialities, may yet look forward to a still more glorious future. And if the perusal of these pages will have the effect of stimulating my countrymen to strive to regain their old position in the intellectual hierarchy of nation, I shall not have labored in vain. For many years, he continued studying various Indian books of Susruta and Charak, and he learnt languages like Sanskrit and Pali. Famous teachers like Pandit Nabakant Kavibhushan worked with him in searching ancient Indian manuscripts in various temple libraries of Banaras. They collected many volumes and texts of books in Sanskrit language, which contained processes, techniques, methodologies, characteristics, and other details about use of chemical knowledge and involvement of concepts of chemistry in ancient India. He studied ancient Indian medical and chemical encyclopedias like Materia Medica of the Hindus by Uday Chand Dutt, Indian Materia Medica, and Indigenous Drugs of India by Kanai Lalde. He took guidance and help from various Kaviraj, the traditional Indian scholars of Indian system. To tell you, these books are still available in the market, and I suggest that our young students should study them. Maybe they might get some innovation idea from out of it. He carried out many of the experiments mentioned in his book, in all these books, to prove and verify their exactness, like preparations with kurchi, kalmeg, vasaka syrups. The best part of Indian ancient sciences was it was using all natural processes. Ray took it as a mission to prove wrong the misconceptions that ancient Indian sciences was based only on mythology and had no proofs. He states in his book that experimental learning was part of Indian system and mentions important work of 13th and 14th century, Yashodhara's Rasa Prakash Sudhakara and Ramchandra's Rasendra Chintamani. These books are still present and they are available in PDF format on Google. I should say you students should go and learn and read it. You will find wonderful knowledge in these books and they are in simple language. Trust me, you will like it. Many of these manuscripts were in pieces and the one that he found complete was Ras Narwana from Raghunath Temple Library, Kashmir. And another copy of it he found at the Oriental MSS Library, Chennai, now known as the Government Oriental Manuscripts Library and Research Center, Chennai. His book highlighted the existence of knowledge of chemistry among the Hindus in 12th century. In his book, Prafulla Chandra proves and emphasizes the fact that alchemy and scientific and medical principles based on the metal mercury purely originated from India. He accepts in his book that with advent of outsiders in India, there was indeed influence of Arabs and European knowledge on Indian alchemy. But the use of many medicinal and chemical composition predates the Arabic and European impact. In fact, he was able to research and find out that it was during the reign of Caliph Harun and Caliph Mansur in 700 AD that the great works of Charak and Sushruta were translated for the very first time into Arabic language. Ray's work on bringing up the ancient knowledge of India helped him in applying it in terms of emerging modern science of that time. His book, History of Hindu Chemistry, proudly presents to the world the great work done by Indian sage scientists like Nagarjuna and Charaka. He quotes and examples to show the timeline wherein he details the preparations of various alkalis and caustics mentioned in the book of Sushruta. Whereas the evidence of this knowledge in Europe is just found in around 1755 AD, almost 3000 years later. Another example that he mentions is the process of zinc extraction, as mentioned in the ancient book Ras Narwana, the process of which is exactly followed by modern chemists till today. So, this book, The History of Hindu Chemistry, was very well researched, very well written, and showed to the whole world that Indian sciences is what predates the knowledge of the whole world. He was able to prove with experiments, being a scientist himself, that all these experiments were correct. In this book of mine, you will find in the end quotes of him and quotes of what other eminent personalities said about Prafulla Chandra. As Gandhiji said about him, it is difficult to believe that the man in simple Indian dress, wearing simple manners, could possibly be the great scientist and a professor. In the year 2011, which was also the International Year of Chemistry, the Royal Society, United Kingdom, honored his work with a chemical landmark plaque on which it was written, to commemorate the life and achievements of Acharya P.C. Ray, the father of Indian chemistry, philanthropist and entrepreneur, who founded modern chemistry teaching and research in India. To tell you, this was the first ever landmark plaque by Royal Society awarded outside of Europe. And on 31st January 2012, this plaque was installed at Presidency College, Kolkata. The book also contains a detailed timeline about the life and works of P.C. Ray. And for the benefit of students and for the benefit of their parents and all the young readers and everyone, in the end, I have added the link to all these great articles. The exact link has been given so that you can also see how this paper looked like, how this research looked like, almost like 125 years back. So I expect students to get inspired from the life of a great personality and scientists like Acharya Prafulla Chandra Ray, a life dedicated completely to the benefit of his students, to his society, to his nation. He played each and every role he could as a human being. I once again wish you the very best for the forthcoming Vidyarthi Vigyan Manthan examination. Thank you and namaste to all of you. Namaste.